Hey everybody, Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Crossbar-Style Base Plate on our 2017 Toyota Corolla IM. Now here's what our base plate's going to look like once we have it installed, but one of my favorite things about it is we don't necessarily want to drive around with these arms sticking out because it is an additional thing adding to the look of our car. But they're going to have a pull ring on it. If we pull it, we can rotate the arm. We can actually remove it, and it has a much cleaner look whenever we're not towing it. Putting the arms back in is going to be just as easy. We can make sure that pull ring's on the bottom. We'll push our arm in, push it in until it bottoms out. We'll rotate it, and you hear that audible click, and you can see that arm's not going to go anywhere. Now the main purpose of a base plate is to give you that solid connection point so you can take your motorhome and tow bar and hook it up to it. Because let's face it, when we hit the road in our motorhome, we get to our campsite or wherever we're going, it's a lot easier to drive a smaller car around even if it is just to run a few errands. So it's a really nice thing to be able to take your Corolla with you rather than having to drive your motorhome everywhere. Now the reason why this is called a crossbar style base plate is because our arms here are actually going to have an additional piece that'll bolt on and have a quick disconnect bar that we can pull off and then pull the arms out so we can make it really fast and easy to hook up. But just keep in mind that crossbar is going to be sold separately, or it'll come with the tow bar that you buy if you get a Roadmaster tow bar. Now Roadmaster does include a bracket as well as two posts to mount the bracket up for, so we can add our wiring up so we can be safe and legal when we're going down the road. Just keep in mind the actual wiring itself is not going to come with it, but it is nice that they went ahead and thought about it and gave you a really nice easy spot to mount everything. Now if you're towing anything including a car, you're going to need either safety chains or safety cables. Now Roadmaster put these attachment points just to the inside of our base plate attachment point. They're going to be really easy to get to, but also kind of blend in so they're not sticking out too far. And some of the cables may have some really large hooks like this. Still have plenty of room to get them hooked on or take them off. And some of the other cables you may find have smaller hooks, and we still have plenty of room to get those hooked on and take them off. Now our Roadmaster base plate is going to be compatible with all Roadmaster tow bars that use a quick disconnect style bar. It is also going to be compatible with some other manufacturers' tow bars with an adapter, but that adapter is going to be sold separately, and you can find it here at etrailer.com. Now as far as the installation goes, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We are going to be required to remove the fascia so we can get behind here and take a few components off, but it's definitely something you can do in your driveway or garage. There's no special tools needed, and really the only kind of cutting we're going to have to do is on the lower section of the grill so we can have our components come out. We're not going to have to cut any of the painted section or anything behind there, and there's no drilling required. In fact, let's go ahead and walk through the installation together, and we'll give you a little tips and tricks how to make it a little bit easier. To begin our installation, we want to pop our hood, and right at our grill area here, on the corners, we're going to have a push pin on each side. We want to pull those out. You want to grab yourself a flathead screwdriver or a trim panel tool. Now each push pin is going to have little notches around the edge. You want to get your flat blade underneath that notch so we can pull the center up. You're going to pry the center of the push pin up first. That's going to release a lot of the tension on the push pin. Then you want to come underneath the base and pull the rest of it out. We'll do the same thing on the other corner of our grill. Now directly behind the emblem on our grill, or right next to the hood release, we're going to have a 10mm bolt that we need to pull out. Grab a 10mm socket, loosen it up, and we'll pull it out. Now if we come to our front wheel well, we're going to come to the very front section. We're going to be paying attention to this push pin here, and we're also going to have another fastener about halfway down. Now this one down here, you'll notice there's a small little notch that's actually in the fastener. You want to grab a flat blade screwdriver, and you're going to want to rotate that till it's horizontal like that. So a full 90 degrees to where that line's going left and right. And then we can remove the center of it. Just get a flat blade screwdriver, pop it out, pull the pin out. And we want to grab the fascia flange. We're just going to slide this clip back. And you'll notice it's going to be attached to the wheel well liner. That's all right. But I'm going to go ahead and pull it off just so I don't have to worry about it interfering with anything else. Just kind of want to pull it, release it off the wheel well liner, we can slide it off. Now this push pin is going to work the same way as the ones under the hood did. It's just very, very small. A very, very small notch there. So we get our flat blade screwdriver in there. Maybe a little difficult. You just kind of want to work at it a little bit. You don't want to break the push pin. But we want to get that center section loose. Again, so it'll release that tension on the pin. And typically, if you can get a little bit of it loose, you can grab it with your fingers, kind of wiggle it back and forth. And then again, we want to get it underneath, or if we can get it to come out with our fingers, we want to pull the rest of the base out as well. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. At this point, we want to move underneath the front of our Toyota, and we're going to have a few fasteners on the bottom. On each side, we're going to have 6 bolts we're going to have to remove. There'd be one towards the front of our fascia, one pretty close to it, another one here moving towards the center, one on either side, one right below our front fascia here, and then another one right in the middle. And again, they're going to be in the same location, so there's going to be a total of 12 of them. But you want to get a 10mm socket and pull all of those out. Now in each corner, at the very front of our front tire, we're going to have 2 bolts at the back of the fascia here. We need to pull those out, so we'll use that same 10mm socket and pull. You're going to want to go to the other side and pull the other out too. Now at this point, I definitely recommend getting an extra set of hands because we're going to be pulling the fascia off. It's not that it's heavy, but it's rather large and we don't want to cause any damage or any scratches. But we'll start at the corner of our fascia. You want to reach in, and you're going to pull that flange outward and away. We're going to start working our way towards the center, releasing these clips. And once we get to about this area, we can actually grab the front on the bottom, kind of pivot it outward, and we can release everything from it. You just want to make sure you have a firm grip. Keep in mind though, if you have fog lights, you want to disconnect those before you get too far away from the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and set this aside where it's not going to get damaged. The lower splash shield may just kind of be sitting there. There's not anything holding it on, so we're going to go ahead and pull it out and get it out of the way. With our fascia removed, we're going to get ready to take our headlights out. Now we're going to have 3 fasteners holding it in place. We'll have one on the side here. We'll have one at the corner of where our hood is, and then one right about halfway in between the middle of our headlight. We're going to grab a 10mm socket, and we'll pull all 3 of those bolts out. Now before we can pull the headlight out, we have to come to that one that's going to be really close to the edge of the hood here, because this tab right here is actually pressed on to the little nut that's on there. So we want to come underneath it and just lift up. You'll see that it's going to release and kind of move a little bit. So you want to make sure you have a firm grip of your headlight. And you want to pull straight outward because there are some pins in there that are holding it in place. Now you want to keep in mind you don't want to pull too far away because we still do have electrical components that are hooked up. And once we have it released, we're going to disconnect all of the electrical cables that are going to our headlights. Now there's going to be several wires and connectors, so we'll just start working our way down. We are going to have a push pin that has our wire connected. So if you can pull it off with your hand. If not, you have a flat blade screwdriver or trim panel tool and pop that out so the wiring can become loose. Try to get underneath it. And just pop the clip out. And work our way over to our connector. There's going to be a tab on there. We'll squeeze the tab. It should release the tension and be able to pull the connector out. We'll do the same thing for the other one over here. Now that we have all of our wires disconnected, we're going to set our headlight aside where it won't get damaged, and then we're going to repeat the process for our other headlight. Now if we look across the top of our bumper structure here, we're going to have several fasteners holding a wire loom in place. We need to pull those out and get these clips off the bumper. Grab a flat blade screwdriver, trim panel tool, whatever you have available. You want to come underneath all these clips. We're going to pry up on them until we can get them out of the bumper. We'll start working our way down until we can release them all. For now, we'll just push it back out of the way. Now you may also have another pushpin fastener holding this wire loom in on the driver's side right at the back of the bumper structure. We need to make sure that everything is loose off of our bumper structure because we're going to be removing it. So again, we'll just come back with our trim panel tool and pull all these clips out. Just want to verify, double check on each side, behind, top and bottom, that there's nothing else attached to your bumper. Now on each side of our bumper structure, we're going to have 2 bolts on top and 2 bolts on the bottom. We need to remove all 8 of these. You want to grab a 14mm socket and pull all of them out. Now I suggest leaving at least 1 in on the side you start on. That way the bumper won't fall when you pull all the bolts out. So this last one I'm going to loosen up, but then just make sure it leaves a couple threads in there, move to the other side, pull those out, that we don't have to worry about it falling. At this point, you want to make sure you have a firm grip on your bumper structure. You can remove that last bolt. And there is actually a couple tabs on top. They're almost like hooks, so your bumper structure won't fall. But we need to lift up slightly, and we'll be able to pull it away from the car and we can set it aside. Now I do want to mention that our bumper structure is not going to get reinstalled. Our base plate is going to be replacing it, but you do want to hold on to this in case you ever remove your base plate. Now on the side of our radiator right here, we're going to have these plastic air dams. We need to trim out a section so that our main receiver brace can fit in place. I already went and marked out the area it needs to be trimmed. Basically, we're just going to follow this line here, go across, until we can come to about the section where it starts to thin out and go vertical. Now whenever you're cutting this, you can use just about whatever you have available because it is just plastic. I'm going to be using a pair of tin snips. I'm just going to go through and cut along that line. And I always suggest trimming a little bit less than you need to because we can always go back and take a little bit off if we need to remove some more. We can't put any material back if we cut too much. Now we're going to need to trim the passenger side as well, but we have this line running right here for our AC. You do not want to cut that line. You don't really even want to get too close to it. So I'm going to kind of move it out of the way so I can keep it as far away as possible. And I am going to be using a rotary tool so I can cut my plastic a little bit quicker and not have to worry as much about causing any damage to that line. Now it's a good idea to get an extra set of hands. We're going to grab our main receiver brace. We'll line it up, the 4 holes with the 4 holes that we took our bumper out of. And you want to make sure you held on to those bolts when we removed our bumper because we're going to put them right back in to hold the brace in place. Now I'm just going to get 1 on each side loosely in place so our hitch can support itself, and then we can start putting in the rest of our bolts. Now before I put all the rest of my bolts in, I'm going to put some Loctite on there. They're going to tell you to do that in the instructions. We're going to put them on all the bolts that we take out and replace. And again, I'm just going to put it in there hand tight for now. And once I have enough bolts in place, I'll remove the first one and put some Loctite on that as well. But we're going to put Loctite on all 4 bolts on each side, and then we can snug them up. But now that all the bolts are in place, I'm going to come back with that same 14mm socket and snug them up. Now right underneath our base plate, if we come to the very bottom, we're going to have 2 bolts that are holding our subframe in place. We need to remove these, but you want to keep in mind you only want to do one side at a time. You want to leave the other side bolts alone until these are back in place. So we'll grab a 17mm socket and we're going to pull both those bolts out of the driver's side. At this point, we want to grab our subframe brace or the connecting piece. There's going to be 2 holes that kind of have these pre-welded in washers. You want those to face up, and you want this flat section that has a hole in it to be going towards the side of your base plate. So I'm going to kind of sneak this in, making sure it goes over this tab right here. And you'll notice that once we have it in place, that hole will line up on our base plate, and if you look underneath, those two holes are going to line up where we removed our subframe bolts. In your kit, they're going to give you new bolts. You put some Loctite on there. You also want to make sure you put that split lock washer in place. And then instead of putting the factory bolts back in, we're going to replace them with our new bolts. So for right now, we just want to make sure that it's in line and we get it in the correct position. So I'm just going to get this loosely started by hand and get the other one in, and then we can snug them up. Now where our bracket lines up with our main receiver, those two holes line up. I'm going to grab the 1/2" bolt out of our kit. Again, just a little bit of red Loctite on each one of our bolts. We're going to pass this through the bracket and through the main receiver brace. And on the other side, we want to follow up with a split lock washer and then secure it down with a hex nut. Now it's a little bit tight in here, but we can actually just move the plastic out of the way so we can get our washer and bolt started. And before we move to the other side and repeat this process, we want to make sure we tighten up those subframe bolts and all the other bolts and make sure they're nice and snug. Now our new bolts are going to be a different size than the one we originally removed. You're going to want to grab a 19mm socket and tighten those up. So now these subframe bolts are tight. We're going to put the other bracket in on the other side using the same combination of hardware. At this point, you want to make sure you come back, and we're going to torque all of our hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. You just want to pay attention to the size of the bolts on the chart in your instructions, because they are going to have different values for your 12mm bolts, the bolts holding your main receiver brace in place, as well as the 1/2" bolts. Now whenever you're tightening up the 1/2" bolts from your subframe brace here, you want to use a wrench to hold the nut on the inside. And it's going to be a 3/4 inch wrench and socket to tighten everything up. And go back and repeat that for any remaining hardware that we have. At this point, we'll be able to put our fascia back on. But before we do have to do some trimming so we can get the arms in place and all of our components can come out of the lower grille area. However, we have a lot more components that we're going to be installing for our flat toe setup, and I suggest doing that now when your fascia is off, because routing any kind of wires, air lines, anything you're doing is going to be a lot easier without having to fight the grille and the fascia. It's a lot easier because everything's open. So we're going to do that now, and once we're done with that, then we'll trim our fascia and show you how to get everything back in place. So I'm going to go ahead and plug my connectors back in for my headlights. When you hear that click, make sure it locks into place. A quick tug. We're going to line everything up. And again, you kind of want to get that spot where you're to pry up on it. You kind of want to push down on there to make sure everything's sitting where it needs to. Then we just take our screws and we start putting everything back in place. And if you notice, we're going to have a couple different style screws. That yellow recessed nut, you should put the coarse threads in there, because that's just going to bite into it since it's not a metal threaded piece. The other machine type screws are going to be going into the top and the side. Now we are going to have to trim the lower section of our grill so that the arms, the safety chain connection points, as well as our electrical bracket can come out. Now your instructions are going to have a diagram to help you cut it, but I found the easiest way to do it is if you hold your fascia up to as close as possible as where it's going to be, you can make a few marks, and again, cut as little as you can, dry fit it again, and if you need to trim some more, it's easier to take some off. So we're going to go ahead and cut a little bit, dry fit it, and make any kind of adjustments necessary. So you can see where we had to trim here. We had our fascia loosely in place. Now whenever you do put it back, you at least want to have one fastener on each side so it doesn't fall until you get it fully clipped in. But I'm going to come back now and I'm going to smooth out these edges and just kind of clean up my cuts. Now that our fascia is back on, it's just going to be as simple as reversing the process of taking it off, replacing all the fasteners and that skid plate underneath. Once you have all your fasteners back in place, that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Roadmaster Crossbar-Style Base Plate on our 2017 Toyota Corolla IM.